Hello, YouTubers, Ukrainians, compatriots, friends, bootlicker shills, desolators, peasants, vassals, minions. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today we're going back to the Ukraine, and what a series of events we've had. And just as quickly as talk arose about a potential civil war in Ukraine, it looks like all parties concerned have worked out some sort of an agreement. At least that's what's been announced today. And I would suggest that there's probably more to come, but I'm not sure if a full-fledged civil war would happen in the Ukraine or not. This series of events we've seen might be the extent of a Ukrainian civil war. And the reason why I say that is because it wasn't like there was a mass uprising. And not to say that the Kiev event was a mass uprising, but it did generate huge numbers and spread out across a lot of territory. And although these events happened in 10 cities in eastern Ukraine, and that's the pro-Russian elements taking over various buildings throughout eastern Ukraine, there doesn't seem to be huge numbers and huge popular uprising. And I also theorize that if there was any violence, then things could escalate, and then the potential for a civil war would occur. But we've had three to four confirmed deaths of pro-Russian supporters, Ukrainian supporters, and killed. And that hasn't seemed to have sparked more violence as of yet. But of course, it's still pretty early in the game, because let's remember that we have downtown Kiev still has a number of barricades, and a lot of these protesters are still in the streets. Although that's one of the points brought up in supposedly in this new agreement, that all these armed groups will disarm. It's hard to see how that is going to happen on a number of different levels. But so let's look at the basic facts. So the events that unfolded were the pro-Russian supporters in East Ukraine and Lugansk, Donetsk, Kharkov demanded referendums. One even declared a Donetsk sovereign republic. And so they talked about having a referendum and perhaps rejoining with Russia as well. And it's kind of interesting to see all the hypocrisy, of course, the United States supporting the very things that the government is doing now that they disapproved of with the previous government. But that's getting to be old news. So the airports and police stations and barricades and government buildings, this has all been set up, and then we've already had a so-called Ukrainian military action. And unfortunately, they wanted to project an image of strength for the new Ukrainian government, and it hardly did that, because we had a pretty feeble effort. Apparently, 15 armored personnel carriers full of paratroopers were stopped by a crowd and turned back. And we also had that incident where the militia seized 6 Ukrainian military vehicles, or at least got them from defectors. So as pointed out in earlier videos, they're going to have a lot of problems with the Ukrainian military actions and even police actions in a lot of these cities, because a lot of people have different loyalties. So there's both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian Ukrainians in the military and the police. So that and another interesting story that continues to permeate the Western press is this idea that there's this huge Russian army massing at the Ukrainian border. And this simply isn't true, and I'll put the documentation below there. So that's kind of an interesting fact, that there's really no out of the ordinary Russian troop movements, and all this talk of Russian invasions seems to be a little hyperbole. But that said, Putin has certainly made it clear that should things escalate out of control, he might be in a position to try and help stabilize the region. And I understand that's also part of the agreement. And so one of the other aspects of this that I find interesting as well is that the Ukrainian government, like governments all over the world, ends up calling the people against the government terrorists. And this seems to be characteristics of governments all over the globe now. But I thought that was really interesting. They go from protesters to militants to terrorists. So the military launched a anti-terrorist operation. And and also what's kind of interesting is that we have the CIA, head of CIA, of course, going over and meeting in Kiev, and then this military push to take back these regions. And incidentally, we also have CIA and FBI agents over there, so that ties in nicely with the fact that I mentioned that FBI agents seem to be working in a lot of overseas operations, and now we find out they're in Ukraine as well. And and then we have, of course, all the members of Congress calling for the arming of Ukraine, and of course that'll be a major goal for the United States and the Eurozone to bring the Ukraine closer in with their access, because I think it load them up with weapons, and so to get Ukraine hooked on the military-industrial complex of the West is going to be quite a coup and help build native armies, and that is the way of the future, and that is one of the main legacies of the new imperialism. Is not occupying the country, but to take control of their economy, take control of their monetary system, and then create native armies that are dependent on you for aid and maintenance and parts and weapons, and so very much more lucrative. And the other thing is that I think that the United States has a lot more interest in the Ukraine being a failed state, at least in the short term, because then it will be more of a problem and disrupt Russia, since Russia's ties with Ukraine are so very close both ways. So they would both suffer immensely if the Ukraine continues to have economic problems. So that said, people need to realize that Russia really has a lot more interest in a stable Ukraine. And certainly they could be the agent provocateurs in what's going on in the Ukraine right now, but I tend to think not, because there's enough pro-Russian people and enough ex-security people and military people in Ukraine who are not happy with the change there, that there would be plenty of willing participants without necessarily having any Russian support. But that said, certainly no one can blame Russia for essentially using the same tactics that the United States and the Eurozone used in the other part of Ukraine. So it goes. So circle goes. So now at least we have a tentative agreement, and we'll see if that will ease tensions and if groups will disarm. But seems not likely. But we'll see what happens. So is that it? Is that the Ukrainian civil war? Is that all there is? Has it already started and ended? So I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.